Jeff Nolan. I'll talk to him too. I'll see what's needed. I can send you something. Yeah. He's not in trouble. Well, break. You know that?
Yes. How do we live? You know what we need to do tonight? Have the backers stand up, introduce themselves.
What's that?
Stand up, introduce yourselves.
I don't know.
I'm just waiting for you to talk. I'm following your lead.
It's all my lead.
See, you can.
They were asking for you to make a presentation.
If I can relate.
Sit down. And why do you care? Sit down. Shut up. I don't want to hear any more. And plus, I'm going to review the video. He did a segment, so I'm going to rewatch that to see what he said. Compared to his speech. I'm going to say his speech 3 times to say the same thing. I just read the series. You know, that's why I want to do those. Thanks, I appreciate that. It's a lot more fun than sitting back here than it is.
He's all I got today.
Put in cheese.
It's down at the bottom.
No, I'm good.
Well, going on.
She signed it out here, just scratch that head with my phone.
We'll call the meeting to order. Like 7 o'clock, so probably I'd like to allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lord, we just thank you for this day and thank you for bringing us all together here, Lord, safely. And we just ask you to be with those in our community that need your help. And we just ask you to be with everybody here on their way home, keeping everybody safe. In Jesus' name, amen.
Welcome to our third joint session with the Township Advisory Board. I will declare open the public hearing for purposes of discussion of the fire territory proposal. Joey?
Thank you, David. All right, I'm going to start with the first of 3 presentations that we have during our public hearing. If you've been at our previous public hearings, these will look very familiar. We are just doing the same presentations over again. That's part of the process. I will then be followed by Phil Chandler, and then Paige will have the full presentation. All right, so my presentation deals with the reasons why we are considering a fire territory. Specifically, we have identified 3 reasons that we are considering a fire territory. That is planning for the future, reliable 24-hour-a-day emergency care, and making sure Fall Creek Township keeps a voice in decisions that affect public safety. So this is about replacing equipment before failure, supporting dependable EMS coverage, and ensuring local representation in shared fire and EMS decisions. So we're going to try to answer the question of what is a fire territory. This is a voluntary partnership, not a takeover or new government. All authority and limits are written into a formal agreement. This slide is a collection of warning signs that communities all over the state might have when they are considering a fire territory. We've kind of broken them up into 5 categories. They are dealing with public impact, workforce challenges, safety, financial pressures, and service strength. So as we look at each of those categories, the public impact would be any kind of lack of service that the community is feeling they are getting from the current public safety. Workforce challenges deal with the availability or lack of availability of volunteers and new recruits. Safety deals with unsafe staffing levels or unsafe equipment. Financial pressures deal with budget shortfalls and lack of capital or long-term planning for financial issues. And then the service strain deals with the increased demand for services. There's a rising call volume across the state for fire and EMS. As that demand goes up, it is possible to see missed calls or coverage gaps where you're waiting a very long time for an ambulance or a fire truck that might be coming from a neighboring area. So a fire territory is a tool communities use to improve financial stability, service planning, and long-term outcomes. The financial stability comes from a reset of the fire levy beyond the current limits, and it also shifts costs across a broader tax base. One big part of the discussion of our fire territory deals with the equipment replacement fund. We are proposing to do an equipment replacement fund along with the territory. We know that emergency vehicles cost millions of dollars. Waiting until a vehicle fails increases the safety risk and the cost. Vehicles now take years to arrive, so you have to plan ahead when doing the purchases. You can't just go out and buy an emergency vehicle and have it here in a couple of weeks. So looking a little bit deeper at our plan for the equipment replacement fund, this slide has a list of upcoming vehicles that will eventually have to be replaced. The first one on that list is the 1996 brush truck. That is for fighting grass fires. Also on that list is the backup pumper. It's a 2001 KME. It is currently 25 years old. We also have a 23-year-old ambulance. And one of the newer vehicles that we bought is our tanker. It was bought with a federal grant, but it was in 2007. That was 19 years ago. So while it's fully functional and there's no plans to need to replace it right now, eventually that truck will go into that antique category. Our planned annual contributions to the equipment replacement fund starts in 2027 at $83,000, and it increments up to $102,000 by 2031. The thought process is to be able to accumulate money in that fund to help purchase these vehicles when they are needed by setting aside that money ahead of time instead of waiting until we are in desperate need of an ambulance or fire truck and then trying to borrow the money to pay for it. Shifting gears, we're talking about 24-hour-a-day ambulance coverage and why that matters to our communities. So emergencies don't follow schedules. The staffing pressures that I've already mentioned are real statewide. There is a lack of EMTs. Phil, during his presentation, will talk a little more in depth about that. There's simply not enough certified people, so there's definitely pressures to find people to staff these runs. Stable funding would help ensure reliable around-the-clock EMS coverage. And that is one of the main goals of the fire territory, is to make sure that 24 hours a day we have an ambulance that is staffed. Our third goal is a seat at the table for Fall Creek Township and its residents. Fire and EMS decisions affect every resident. We don't need fire and EMS every day, but at some point in our lives we probably will. and we also deserve to have a voice in how that is delivered. The setup of the territory with the territory board ensures that Fall Creek Township has defined representation and shared decision-making authority when it comes to the financial matters behind fire and EMS. So this slide talks about some of the planned fire services and staffing. This plan is all about filling the gaps. It does not replace volunteers. We still intend to have a volunteer fire department. We have a good fire department and we want to continue to support them, but we understand that in certain circumstances, especially during the day, there are going to be gaps in coverage that we need to plan for in the future. We will not always have volunteers available all the time. This slide highlights what new services the fire territory is proposed. First, it funds the administrative work required to run the fire and EMS, things like payroll and HR, so that work is properly supported. It also sets aside dedicated funding to maintain the fire station. A major improvement is the EMS staffing that I've already mentioned. The plan funds 8 full-time EMS positions to ensure reliable 24-hour ambulance coverage. For the fire services, volunteers remain the backbone. Finally, it invests in safety through ongoing training and regular replacement of firefighter protective gear. Gear is not cheap. By NFPA standards, it should be replaced every 10 years. Our current set of gear, we have about 30 to 35 sets. It's all over the 10-year age currently. This budget would include replacement of 3 sets of gear every year. So in a 10-year span, we would replace 30 sets of gear so that none of the gear would ever be out of date. Shifting gears again, we're going to talk about how the fire territory is established, what the procedure is. State law requires public notice, multiple hearings, local votes, and a state review. This process is designed to be transparent and structured. So that's what we're in right now, is a set of public hearings to allow feedback, as well as to educate everyone on the proposals and the services that are in those proposals. The laws are pretty specific on when we are allowed to establish a fire territory. All of the steps have to be completed in the first quarter of the year, or you have to start again the following year. Once it is approved locally, the plan is submitted to the state for review. The state may approve, adjust, or deny the proposed levy. Within our interlocal agreement, we define the participating units as the town of Middletown and Fall Creek Township. Further, we define Fall Creek Township as the provider unit for the fire territory. So what does that mean? It's kind of a new term. Basically, provider unit means that Fall Creek Township would handle the administration and the budgeting for the fire territory, but that authority is limited by the agreement, and the control remains shared within the fire board. So looking further at finances, all fire funds are combined from Middletown and Fall Creek Township. They are only used by the territory for fire and EMS services. The separate equipment replacement fund supports long-term planning, so that would be a cumulative fund that would grow year to year. The new levy funding would start in 2027. In the past, both Middletown and Fall Creek Township have incurred debt to help pay for fire and EMS. Any existing debt would stay where it is. Future debt is shared only if approved at the same time. Rules are clearly defined up front if one unit leaves the territory. essentially, there's a set of rules if there would ever be a divorce. Obviously, Middletown and Fall Creek Township have been tied together for many, many decades, providing fire and EMS. When it comes down to it, we sort of have to make it work. There's no way for Fall Creek Township to provide fire and EMS on their own. The same way, it would be very difficult for Middletown to provide fire and EMS on their own. That partnership has worked for a lot of years, and this territory just continues that. But by law, we do have to have some provisions in there if it was to ever be separated. So I mentioned the Fire Protection Board. Each community will have 2 members on the territory board, and then there will be an at-large community member who is chosen by the Fire and EMS membership. The board provides oversight, but it cannot act beyond what the communities approve. So for example, the Fire Territory Board do not create their own debt and borrow without an act of the individual participating units. Some of the roles of the fire board will be to establish policies and coordinate future purchases for fire and EMS. One thing that we really like about the idea of having a fire board is the ability to plan for what is needed in the future. Right now, sometimes those discussions can be a little disjointed because the stakeholders don't really know who to talk to. Do we talk to the town council? Do we talk to the trustee? Do we talk to the township board? Where do we start when we're talking about the future and what the department needs? So hopefully this will be a much more centralized way to plan. So does an increased levy limit mean that we pay more? Well, of course, the answer depends. The levy numbers that are included in our financial information for the fire territory are maximums. The plan assumes a worst-case scenario due to a lot of uncertainty in the income tax law. We currently fund fire and EMS heavily in Middletown, both by Middletown and Fall Creek Township, with local income tax revenue. That law was reset and it changes. And some of the control over local income tax has been shifted to the county council. We are assuming that in the future, county council will pass local income tax that is optional in Henry County that will provide funding for fire and EMS as well as other public safety. Unfortunately, our financial advisors have told us that we cannot include any revenue in our plan that isn't guaranteed. So since we can't 100% say that the county council is going to vote for lit, we're not allowed to include any of that. So the financial data that you'll see tonight includes 0 local income tax. Again, we feel that is unlikely. Any local income tax that we would receive, that we feel is likely to receive, would lower what our levy would have to be. So the fire territory gives us options. It allows fire and EMS to receive income tax funding if adopted by the county council. Without it, those funds are likely lost. Currently, the township funds its portion of fire and EMS relying on lit funds. We have a contract for fire and EMS protection. That amount that we provide currently to Middletown for fire and EMS far exceeds our current fire and EMS property tax levy. So one way to look at it is the majority of our funding for fire and EMS from the township is currently provided by lit, not by property taxes. And again, we assume that will be replaced in some fashion in the future. We just have a lot of uncertainty and we can't 100% include it in our figures. Summarizing that, if the county council acts, then fire and EMS in Middletown will receive local income tax dollars. But it really comes down to them, and we have no control over how those votes would happen. Property tax levies do not have to fund the entire budget. But again, with the numbers that we're showing tonight, the majority of it is funded with property taxes, simply because that is the funding source that we know with certainty that we will have. This slide compares some of our tax rates with some other local neighbors that have fire territories. Paige is going to talk a lot more about the financials, but I wanted to just highlight some of the current rates that are out there. Marklettville and Adams Township in Madison County is just right over the line. In 2026, they have a fire tax levy of 0.67. That goes up through 2028 to 0.87 per $100 of value. Comparing that to Union Township, which is Chesterfield, they're also in Madison County. They have a current tax levy for fire and EMS of 0.7029. That does not increase over the next couple of years. Our proposed Fall Creek and Middletown tax rate for 2027 would be 0.3069, and it would go up slightly in 2028. You can see it just barely increments up to 0.3090. So our rates would be less than half the rates of some of our neighbors. There is a new state law this year, or state statute rather, that limits new fire territories to a rate not to exceed 0.4 per 100% of assessed value. So we had to keep that number less than 0.4, and we actually did it by quite a bit. We didn't push it to that because that's funding that is not necessary in order to fully fund the budget that we're proposing. So this is about reliable emergency care, responsible planning, local control, not promises, but preparation. This decision is about safety, stability, and accountability. That's why it's being discussed openly with public input and local votes. I am now going to turn it over to Phil Chandler. He's going to talk from the viewpoint of Middletown EMS. It's over.
We're going to talk a little bit about the EMS portion of this from 1974 to present. Middletown EMS, a little history, was established in 74 by a group of citizens concerned about ambulance response time coming from Newcastle. This group formed a 501c3 not-for-profit corporation and went through the area to raise donations in order to purchase the first ambulance and send members to training to become state-certified EMTs. From 74 to 2017, the private corporation has purchased every ambulance Middletown has had and donated them to the town for their use. Over the years, the service has evolved into the organization it is today, with funding from the town and township, as well as capital purchases still being made from this not-for-profit. When I became chief in '95, the EMS did 325 runs a year. In 2024, we did 711 runs, which is a 120% increase. In '06, the ambulance we purchased cost $103,000. In 2025, Fall Creek Township has purchased our newest ambulance, which arrives in the spring of '26 for a cost of $365,000, increases of nearly 270%, which is what the graphs to the side are showing. Through the past 32 years, our available budget from the town and township combined has remained nearly the same, although the cost of supplies, trucks, and equipment has skyrocketed. What does Middletown EMS do? We are a basic life support service, which means EMTs stabilize patients with non-invasive care for transport to the hospital, handling various medical and trauma situations. Some of these include bleeding control, CPR, and using AEDs, establishing an airway, and splinting and bandaging. As a BLS service, EMTs cannot give cardiac drugs, pain medications, or interpret cardiac rhythms. Those have to be performed by a paramedic. We are required by state statute or state guidelines to call for advanced life support, which is a paramedic, under certain circumstances for the best pre-hospital care of the patient. ALS, a little history on that. Until the late 1990s, a private ALS provider was used to bill patients directly. Due to insurance guidelines, only the transporting ambulance could bill the insurance. This left patients responsible for the remaining out-of-pocket costs, which the ALS service would pursue reimbursement with every means necessary to cover the cost of that run. To reduce the financial burden on the patient in the late 90s, we began billing insurance directly and contract with an ALS provider using insurance revenue to cover those ALS costs, so patients were not responsible for that. Over time, multiple ALS options have been used. Currently, a shared model is in place. Chesterfield provides ALS in the northwest portion of the territory, while Newcastle EMS provides ALS in the remaining area. Middletown EMS then pays each service their ALS intercept charge. Currently, Middletown EMS bills insurance and accepts assignment, which means we take the amount paid as a full payment. Reimbursement rates, particularly from Medicare and Medicaid, have not kept pace with rising operation costs and inflation seen in the EMS field. In '92, EMS certification required an 88-hour course completed in under 4 months. We only went to class twice a week. Today's EMT program exceeds 160 classroom hours and includes ER and ambulance observation. Typically, it spans 6 months with 2 weekday and several Saturday commitments just to become an EMT. Since COVID, the number of certified EMTs and paramedics statewide has declined approximately 25% due to fewer renewals and new certifications, which, as Joey mentioned, is contributing to a statewide and national EMS staffing shortage. Changes in volunteers. Middletown EMS has a rich history of volunteer staffing. Up until the early 2000s, like the rest of the country, we have seen a sharp decline in volunteerism. Since 2010, Middletown EMS has transitioned to paid EMTs to maintain reliable coverage. As of November of '24, both EMT and driver positions are paid due to volunteer shortages. Currently, we have 8 volunteer-only members. We have 4 paid and volunteer members, and 14 paid part-time members, with the majority of that coverage is provided by the paid EMTs and drivers, especially during the day. Our current struggles, paid EMS coverage is partially funded through the town's LIT. As Joey mentioned, LIT funding is all changing through the local LIT EMS allocation. However, these funds are insufficient. This requires the private corporations to subsidize staffing costs beyond insurance revenue, which is not a sustainable long-term model. Despite paid staffing, recruiting qualified personnel remains difficult due to the limited sustainable funding, which prevents offering benefits such as health insurance and retirement. This places us at a disadvantage compared to other paid departments amid a statewide EMT shortage. And I'd just like to thank you for your time. I hope that this has given you some insight to our EMS operations.
Thank you, Phil.
We're gonna have Paige come up and give the financial advisor presentation.
Good evening.
purpose of my presentation is to provide a general overview of the financial impact analysis that we prepared. So some of this is a little bit repetitive, so I'll try to go through it a little quicker. So what is it? It is a legally established consolidation mechanism. So this is one of the ways of the state of Indiana that fire departments can get additional funding for fire services. It's a statute that allows a consolidation with adjoining taxing units. Why establish? It's to create a sustainable and dedicated funding source. Also, it spreads the cost of fire services equally over the entire tax base. It would hopefully improve operational efficiency and response times. It enhances firefighter safety, and it meets the growing service demands, and Darryl covered a lot of that already. So we are required to have 3 public hearings. This is the 3rd hearing of the 3. On February 17th, there will be a meeting where the 2 legislative bodies, the Township Board and the Town Council, will vote to either approve, modify, or reject the fire territory. If the fire territory is approved, then a packet of information will be submitted to the Department of Local Government Finance, who will make a decision as to whether the fire territory can levy taxes in the first year, which would be 2027. So again, the proposed fire territory are the 2 participating units of Fall Creek Township and Middletown Town. One of these units has to be designated the provider unit, and that just simply means that that unit, which in this case would be Fall Creek Township, would levy the property taxes and collect the revenues and pay for the funding of fire services. Although there can be a phase-in of up to 5 years of the property rate and levy, here we are just considering having it go into full implementation in the first year, which is 2027. So we're going to do a comparison first of the funding currently, because it's good to know how is this funded currently. I'm sorry, I misspoke on this last slide. We are doing a 5-year phase-in, thank you, sorry about that. We are doing a 5-year phase-in of the rate, but the first year is what we'll focus on the most, because you will see the years 2028 through 2031, it's a very minimal impact. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is show a comparison of where we are right now. So Fall Creek Township generates revenue of approximately $102,000 to fund fire services, and Middletown is just a little bit more than that at about $128,000. So from both the town and the township, total revenues that are generated just specifically for fire services is about $230,000. Rates, so if you have property that's located in Middletown, then you are paying approximately 13 cents just for the fire portion of your property tax. If your property is located in Fall Creek Township, you're paying about 6 cents for fire services in relation to your property tax dollars. We do need to show you an itemized budget of the proposed fire territory, and there are handouts up front that you can grab on your way out if you want to see the line item budget. It does span over 2 pages, but all in all, the total operating budget proposed for the fire territory is $834,000 for the operating portion. That would be the normal day-to-day types of functions. And then there's a capital outlay portion, because as was mentioned earlier, the fire territory can establish an equipment replacement fund that can be used for equipment replacement, apparatus, housing. And so each year, that is a rate limited fund, each year that fund can generate about $83,000 that can be used just for capital purposes. So if we add both the operating and the capital budgets together, we have a first year budget of about $917,000. It gradually increases through 2031. This is a snapshot of the funding over the 5-year period. So in 2027, we know that we need about we need a levy, a property tax levy of about 652,000 for operating, approximately 79,000 for the equipment replacement fund. There's credits that you all get on your property tax bills called circuit breaker tax credits. We know that the property tax revenue will be reduced somewhat because of those credits, and if that should happen, then the fire territory will need to adjust their budget accordingly. So again, we're showing worst case scenario. So we're showing that potentially, right off the bat, the fire territory may need to adjust their budget by 93,000 if circuit breakers come in as we anticipate. If not, then they'll be able to fund the full budget or partially more of the budget as they have proposed. We also know that there could be some vehicle excise tax that can be generated here. So when you go to the license branch to register your vehicle, you're paying excise tax, vehicle excise tax. That actually gets distributed out to all the taxing units within the county. And if you have a new taxing entity like this fire territory, it can also get a share of that vehicle excise. So we can count that as revenue. We also have EMS fees as a revenue source that we can count. We think we're conservative here. As we stated earlier, it's hopefully worst case scenario. We don't want to show that we're gonna get a bunch of revenue to lower the property tax if that's not going to happen. So those are the revenue sources. And then the funding in total would be $824,000 for the budget piece. Now that is less than what was on the previous itemized page, but again, that's because we're assuming that the fire territory adjusts its budgets if there are circuit breaker losses as we are projecting here. So total property tax levy, if you include capital and operating for the first year, is about $731,000. If we divide that over the tax base of the proposed fire territory by each $100 of that tax base, then we need a rate of 0.3069 to fund this fire territory the first year. When we analyze what could potentially happen with net assessed value growth, where again, we were conservative on this, the tax rate should only increase by about 0.1%. Or actually, the tax liability impact should increase by about 0.1% each year. So again, minimal increases going forward in the phase-in. So debt service. Fall Creek Township does have debt outstanding for the purchase of emergency medical vehicles, improvements, and equipment. And that's okay. Just know that this pre-existing debt will not get folded into the fire territory. It has to stay with the township until the debt is paid off. It will be paid off on January 1st of 2031. As Joey mentioned earlier, new debt can be issued by the provider and or participating unit of the fire territory if in years to come there's some large apparatus or something that needs to be funded that's a capital asset, and there's not monies available to do that, then debt can be issued, so that is an option. So now getting into how does this impact the property tax bill? So really for us to determine that, we need to look at how the fire territory impacts the district tax rate. Your tax bills are based on a district rate that includes the county, the library, a municipality, a township, a school. So it's all those taxing units combined. Well, when we determine how these things impact property tax bills, we have to determine how it impacts the district rate. So we have the district rates here for Fall Creek, which is taxing district 005. It's 1.7307. This is 2025. That's what we had for this projection. And then Middletown is 2.5337. So we get to take off the rates that are currently charged for fire services first before we apply the fire territory rate. So as I mentioned earlier, Fall Creek currently charges about 6 cents for fire service, so that can be eliminated. Middletown is about 13 cents for fire service, so we can eliminate that. Then we apply the 0.3069. So the The net impact is lower than the 30 cents that we need because we were replacing a rate that was there previously. So how does that impact the district rate? And this is where these percentages are very important, because if you have a piece of property located in Fall Creek Township outside the town limits, the 14.3% means that's the maximum your tax bill could increase if your property is not currently at the tax cap. So I'm gonna show some examples. But again, that should be the maximum increase that you see on your tax bill. So you can go on GIS, look up your tax bill, multiply it by 0.143, and that would be the increase. Now, if you're at the tax caps already, which you can tell on your tax bill if you are, there will be no increase to your tax bill. For Middletown, it's a 7% increase, so again, that would correlate to a 7% increase to your tax bill. So just pick up your tax bill from GIS and multiply it by 0.07, and that should give you a good estimate. So the 5-year phase-in, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's really the first year that you're going to see the primary impact. Going from 2028 to 2031, it's just a 0.1% each year, so it's hardly an increase at all. It's really the first year that the impact will be felt. Now for some specific examples. So here we have 3 different property values. We have 150,000 residential home value. The middle value is actually the average residential home value for this area, which is $210,000. And then the last column is a $300,000 home value. So again, the impact is going to be based on where the property is located. So if the property is located in Fall Creek, then that $150,000 home value would see an increase of about $11 monthly, or annually that works out to be $130. The average residential home value of $210,000 would see an increase of $17 annually, which is about $207. I'm sorry, $17 monthly, $207 annually. And then that last one, $300,000, would see about a $27 increase monthly, and then $322 annually. Now, if we move down to Middletown, we do get to a point where there's a lot of residential homesteads hitting the caps, and therefore they will be impacted. The $150,000 home value will be impacted. That's not quite at the caps yet, but we're looking at $3 a month or $38 annually. But when you get to 210,000 and 300,000, those property values are at the caps, which just means that those property values will not be impacted by this fire territory. If you're curious as to how much of your tax bill goes to each of the various entities that are within the taxing district, this shows kind of a before and after. So on the left-hand side of the screen, this is basically 2025. We don't have 2026 tax bills yet, but based on 2025, we're calling this the 2026 baseline. Your tax bill, about $48 of your tax bill, if you had that average residential home value of $210,000, about $48 went towards fire services. You can see most of your tax bill goes towards the school corporation and Henry County, and then some other units there as well. If this fire territory passes, then a larger portion of your tax bill goes to fire, which that's why we're here, obviously, to get additional revenue for fire services. So now your tax bill would be about $254 would go to fire services, and then the other units would get the same amount that they've gotten previously. Now for Middletown, it's a little bit of a different story. I mean, currently you can see it's about $107 that goes towards fire service, and you can see how the rest of it's split up, Henry County, the town, and the school board. But then going into, if this fire territory is established, because we have those circuit breaker credits, some of the overlapping taxing units may receive a little bit less tax dollars because of the circuit breaker shift. It's not a lot, but there is some impact there, and I'm gonna get more into that in a minute. But that's why you see a little bit less going to those other units, but the fire services will get, the bigger chunk at 238,000 as compared to currently. So other property types we look at, we picked out a $100,000 agricultural land property type. And if it's located in Fall Creek Township, you're looking at about $21 monthly, or on an annual basis, about $248. If that property is located in Middletown, it's already at the tax cap, so you will not be impacted if you have agricultural land inside the town limits. We also looked at a residential rental property at $300,000, so if that's located in Fall Creek, you're looking at a monthly increase of about $62, and then an annual of about $744. In Middletown, that particular piece of property is at the tax cap, so we do not anticipate an increase. And then the third property type is the commercial property at $500,000. So if that's located in Fall Creek, you're looking at $103 a month, or on an annual basis, $1,240. If it's located in Middletown, that is not at the tax cap, so we would expect $74 a month or $890 annually. Again, the percentages are the same though, no matter what property value. If that property is not at the caps, then you would expect either a 14.3% increase for properties located in Fall Creek or 7% in Middletown. So now we are required to let you know about the impact on overlapping taxing units. That's something we are required to show. So first up, we'll start off with the property tax caps, and I mentioned this briefly earlier, the circuit breaker tax credits. So these are good for taxpayers because it limits the amount of property tax that you can pay on your property. And it's based on 3 different property classifications. So residential homesteads are limited to 1% of the gross assessed value. So if your gross assessed value of your homestead is $100,000, then you would not pay more than $1,000. Now, there are some exceptions there. If a school went out for a referendum, meaning you voted to allow the school to levy, you have to pay that in addition. So again, there are some exceptions. Other residential, which would primarily be rental properties, ag land, and long-term care facilities, are capped out at 2%. And commercial, industrial, and all other properties are capped out at 3%. So when people hit these, or when taxpayers hit these, you're going to get a $500 credit. Well, that so the next 2 pages here shows how every single unit in the county is impacted by this proposed fire territory. Some are impacted very little, others a little bit more. But I have bolded there that the Fall Creek Middletown fire territory could be impacted the very first year, and that impact. Be mindful of that and adjust the budget accordingly. These are just estimates as we stand here today. But it does impact the units somewhat in the county. So again, that goes on to 2 pages. Local county, we have about 6 different local income taxes. That is the taxes you pay on your adjusted gross income for this county. So if you live in this county, you pay a Henry County local income tax, and there's, again, 6 different taxes. Those local income taxes are distributed out to the taxing units within this county based on how much the units levy. Let's say Fall Creek has a higher levy because they're a unit of this fire territory, they're going to get a larger share of that local income tax. That's how it would work. However, it's based on the year previous. if this fire territory goes into effect in 2027, it would not impact local income taxes until 2028. Now, we've got coming down the pipe, at least right now, as I stand here today, it could change tomorrow, but SEA 1 has totally revamped our local income tax structure. So the local income taxes that we know today are going to expire at the end of 2027. There is some proposed legislation that might push that a year, so it expires at the end of 2028. But I have to go with what we know today. So if the local income tax structure expires at the end of 2027, this fire territory will not impact the 2028 distributions of local income tax because we'll have a totally different system. And as was alluded to earlier, that system, has a fire EMS lit local income tax, but the county, it's under the county's authority to adopt it. So they don't have to adopt it, but they could adopt it. So we can't put it in here because there's no guarantee that they will adopt it. And then so because Fall Creek could potentially levy more taxes because of this fire territory, that would cause the fire territory to get a share of that vehicle excise, which is good. But that said, if they get a share, then the shares of the other units are going to go down slightly. So we have to show that. We have to show the impact to every single unit. This is part of the information that will get filed with the state if this should pass. And that goes on to 2 pages. And again, we have some handouts up front if you really want to get into those type of details, but it is something we are required to present. So that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Paige. I'm going to ask our attorney, Dan Shackle, to briefly give us an intro on the public comment portion. Dan.
Good evening, everyone. To help everyone is heard, to help ensure everyone is heard clearly and respectfully, please come to the podium, share your name and your address, and let us know whether you live in Middletown or Fall Creek Township. Each speaker will have up to 5 minutes to share their comments. If somebody before you has said what you're going to say, you can say that and move on. But if you have something new to say, please feel free. We kindly ask that all questions and comments be made from the podium so the entire room can listen and give each speaker their full attention. Thank you for participating and for helping us create a thoughtful and welcoming discussion space.
Would anybody like to make a comment?
I would.
Step up to them.
Good evening. Name's J.B. Chapman. I live in Jefferson Township. I own about 600 acres in Creek Township. And but my address is 8362 North County Road 500 West. And I think we do need a new fire district. I think we do. I think where I'm coming from, and I went through all the numbers, I know what it's going to cost me extra as it is right now. But I think what I took out of all of this is I think there should be some modifications. Because we talked about, I think modifications. And I guess where I'm going with this is I don't mind. Cost $5, a little over $5 an acre, which will be about $3,000. Fair dirt. I would venture to say that they probably only have for agricultural runs for fires or something like that on farm land. And most farmers that I know, if they have this happen, they come to the fire department and I went to Jefferson Township, I just happened to have a field fire last year. And I went to Melinda and I gave her $500 and to help with the expenses. So I guess what is, I think the land should be maybe a acre. The tax, the charge for the farmland should be less. Everybody that has houses should pay a little more. And I'm willing to pay more for my barn. Because that's where most of the runs are gonna go. For elderly people, you guys know where all the runs go. Most of the, you're pulling from the farmland. The farm economy is not real good right now. And we're probably talking about spending a good bit of money at the school also for a bus barn. So we're gonna throw another $5 an acre, so that's $10. So I'm gonna be at about $55 an acre for bare farm ground. It just feels like I'm the low-hanging fruit that we're just gonna pull from. Because I think I heard somebody say, well, I think Joey said, well, we can get that. So that's where I stand, and I hope you guys consider my thoughts and what I've said tonight. And, you know, I do believe we do need a fire district. I think you need to modify the way that you're getting the funds. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes, I appreciate your comments on that very much, because we, in my experience, that has come up several times. Unfortunately, the statute does not allow differing tax rates on different property types. So perhaps there needs to be.
Guys in suits, man.
So, again, appreciate these comments.
Would anyone else like to step up and comment?
Why did you mention modify? That's the
Oh,
only
because
thing.
the modification could be a reduction of a budget or a reduction of a rate overall, but it has to be a uniform rate. Like, it can't be differing rates on different property types.
No fair. Any other comments? Before we close the public hearing
I'm
portion?
texting him, right to go.
Where's Corey Criswell?
He's on his way home, he's with my children.
Anyone else? Going? Gone. Okay, declaring closed the public hearing portion of the meeting. And we've got some other joint business to do with the township. Yes.
So we have, previously we had talked about the equipment replacement fund and the ordinance for that. We are in need of doing a joint public hearing for information, public comments on specifically establishment of the equipment replacement fund.
This evening.
Yes.
I'll declare that public hearing open.
I would venture to guess that Dan is going to say the rules are identical for public comments. Is that right?
Yes, the rules are identical.
So if anyone would like to comment on the
I mean, I'll make a couple comments. So the equipment replacement fund is that capital fund that I had mentioned that the fire territory can establish. The statute requires that there's a public hearing on that fund. We talked about it during the presentation. If, you know, that fund is basically a moot point if the fire territory isn't established, but we have to kind of run this process concurrently with the establishment of the fire territory. So again, the equipment replacement fund, separate fund from the fire territory operating, has a maximum rate of 3.33 cents. And it's something that's allowed by statute. But everything that was in the financial information included that fund. This is not in addition to it. It includes that fund. So if anybody would like to make comments, this would be your time.
Anyone? Okay, I will declare that public hearing closed. Do we need any more public hearings now?
fresh out of public hearing.
If not, the town has some ordinance. We need to do the second reading on establishing the equipment replacement fund. Chair would entertain a motion to do that.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on that? No, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Okay, that's done. We also need to introduce ordinance 2026-2, which is the establishing document to create the fire territory, should that ultimately be the decision next week.
In 2 weeks.
Next meeting, June 6th. We need to read that into the record though, so everybody hears what that's going to be about and knows what these boards will be deciding next week. So this is an ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Middletown, Henry County, Indiana, approving an interlocal cooperation agreement with Fall Creek Middletown Fire Protection Territory. Whereas Indiana Code IC 36-8-19 permits 2 or more contiguous units of local government to establish a fire protection territory to provide fire protection services to those participating units. And whereas the Town of Middletown, Henry County, Indiana, and Fall Creek Township, Henry County, Indiana, are contiguous units of government and have determined that it will be in the best interest of the citizens of those units of government to enter into an agreement to form a fire protection territory. Now therefore be it ordained by the Town Council of the Town of Middletown, Henry County, Indiana, as follows. Section 1, the Town Council of the Town of Middletown and the Township Board of Fall Creek Township, collectively, Middletown and the Township shall be known as the Provider Unit, hereby joined together to establish a fire protection territory to be known as the Fall Creek Middletown Fire Protection Territory, or the Territory. Section 2, the territory shall include the entire area of the township and shall include the entire area of Middletown. Section 3, the provider unit shall be Fall Creek Township of Henry County, Indiana. Section 4, upon the adoption of this ordinance by Middletown and the corresponding resolution by the township, the parties hereby agree that the property tax rates imposed in Middletown and the township for the services provided by the territory shall be at a uniform tax rate upon all of the taxable property within the territory. Section 5. The interlocal cooperation agreement in the form attached hereto as Exhibit A includes the creation of a fire protection territory fund by the provider unit from which all expenses of the operating and maintaining the fire territory protection services, including repairs, fees, salaries, depreciation on all depreciable assets, rents, supplies, contingencies, and other expenses lawfully incurred within the territory shall be paid. The funds may not be used for any other expense or purpose, including the payment of debt service or lease rentals on obligations issued or entered into finance buildings or equipment. Money in the fund may be used to repay any advance made by the provider unit to the fund, if any, or to transfer to the territory's equipment replacement fund. Section 6, the budget for the fund shall be approved by the township board, subject to any additional procedures detailed in the interlocal agreement. The budget shall be set in an amount sufficient to meet the expenses of operation and maintenance of fire protection services within the territory to maintain an appropriate operating reserve. After adoption of the fire protection budget, the participating units shall establish the tax levy required to fund the budget as estimated by the provider unit, subject only to any applicable property tax levy controls. Section 7, the interlocal agreement includes the establishment of an equipment replacement fund to be used to purchase fire protection equipment, including housing. The equipment replacement fund shall be a separate levy on all taxable property within the township. Section 8, the interlocal agreement provides for the establishment of a fire territory executive board, which shall perform certain administrative planning and operating business of the fire territory with the involvement of the participating units subject to the terms of the interlocal agreement. Section 9, the participating units designate and establish the provider unit as the enforcing authority for any uniform fire and building codes of the county or state applicable within the territory, any ordinances or resolutions of the participating units, ambulance fee schedule, fireworks, or amusement permitting and inspection procedures to be enforced throughout the territory, including but not limited to IC 36-8-17-7, and collect any fines or penalties payable to the territory for violation of such laws or ordinances, all in compliance with the relevant resolutions providing for the same as adopted by the provider unit or identical ordinances and resolutions adopted by each participating unit. As recommended by the executive board, as defined herein, each of which shall be enacted and enforced uniformly through the territory by the provider unit on the same terms and with the same powers and authority as provided to the participating units. Section 10, a copy of the interlocal agreement is attached as Exhibit A and included as part and incorporated by the reference into this ordinance as enforceable as an ordinance of Middletown pursuant to Indiana law. Section 11, the President of the Town Council of Middletown, Henry County, Indiana, and Clerk Treasurer of the Town of Middletown, Henry County, Indiana, are hereby authorized as necessary to execute the interlocal agreement and to take all actions deemed necessary or advisable in order to effectuate any other purposes of this ordinance. Section 12, this ordinance is hereby passed and adopted by the Town Council of the Town of Middletown, Henry County, Indiana, at a special joint meeting of the participating units at the next meeting by a vote of such and such votes. So that's how it reads. The chair would entertain a motion to approve this introduced ordinance on its first reading.
I'll make a motion to approve first reading of 2026-2.
I'll second
Is there any further discussion? And please don't ask me to read that again. If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. Does the Township Advisory Board have business to transact before?
We do, so we are gonna do pretty much identical parts. So we have the second reading of the ordinance, or the resolution for establishment of the fire equipment fund. That was resolution number 2026-1. We previously read that. It is identical to the town council's ordinance. It is just a resolution for that establishment of fire equipment fund.
All right, so I'm gonna need a motion to approve the second reading of the ordinance resolution for the establishment of the fire equipment fund.
I'll make a motion.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving the second reading of the ordinance, say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
And then instead of reading the entire thing, we're gonna have our identical resolution for the establishment of the fire territory. It's exactly what Dave read, except it is a resolution and it is for the township instead of the town council. And this is the first reading of that identical resolution.
Okay, so I need a motion to approve the first reading of the ordinance resolution for the establishment of the Fall Creek Middletown Fire Protection Territory.
I make a motion to vote.
Got a motion and a second. Got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Motion passes 2-1.
That is all.
Should let Joey read it. He's got a lot younger voice than I do.
I was pretty excited when you started reading that. I had my water bottle ready.
If we find ourselves in a similar situation to Chief.
All right. I believe that's all we have for the township board, so
Okay.
we need a motion to adjourn the township.
Need a motion to adjourn the township meeting?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Need a second? All in favor?
We'll declare a 5-minute recess so people can take a bio break or whatever, and then we'll get into the balance of our agenda.
Three times is enough, trust me.
Brian, how are you?
Call me if you need me.
Let me know. One bottle of highly.
We have to
Yeah. They're supposed to bring ours over.
You guys can go home. Hey, you don't have to stay.
I'm stupid entertainment.
I'm going home.
You say you called Tom?
I thought he was gonna bring it over here and do it over
Feel scared or what?
See ya. Are you being good? Are you sure? Ain't Dad out of trouble? No, you're not. You're not making a big deal out of that. Listen, that's a full-time job right there.
So, he.
You just
He.
yourself.
Oh, is he? I thought it was she. No, you're good, but I appreciate that. I wish other kids were like that. He argued and argued because you wanted to come. And I was like, it's gonna be boring. Good job. Hey, take care.
See ya.
Are you ready to go?
Whatever you do, I follow
I wonder where you learned that from.
Right
How you doing?
About 15 times, yeah. Have you, what's the name of it? No, it's what our next 4 cruises are on. Have you done this? We just booked a 7-day Caribbean cruise. Yeah. So, we figured you guys would probably been on that exact ship. Yeah. 27th of March through April 12th. On a cruise. It's a 10-day Southern Caribbean. Oh, yeah. Drive down. Well, yeah. I spent less than Wow. And it was technically like 50% off the room. So we got a deal on it. Because I was like, I'm just gonna book it tonight. And when I saw the deal, I was like, yeah, we're booking it tonight.
Well, and then when you compare it to all the other ones, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the best thing. Compared to Virgin, Princess,
MSC, yeah. We don't do that. Yeah. But we like the great because you don't have to. Oh, really? So you don't have to. There's 2 restaurants where I'm sure you can't get me away with this. There's only 2 that dress up like that. Everything else is. Because like, wow, who are you going to dress up for the
dinner. And I was telling her when we looked at it,
That's why we go on. Because we did Little America.
Yeah.
And then, that was 20 years ago. We did, well, Drew.
I look back at right where you're on vacation.
Down to Aruba and Curacao.
Okay. Yeah, this one's kind of cool because it hits Mexico, but then it hits Honduras.
Done that one about 5 times.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Pretty excited.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
All right, you're straight, yeah?
Yeah. I'm getting out of here before then.
Yeah.